Hello and welcome to the Cybersecurity podcast. Today's guest is Tim King. He's a technology savvy teacher, just the right kind that we like to have on the show. And today's topic is who's responsible for due diligence for technology used in the classroom. Last week we launched our EdTech survey, and our EdTech survey has been taken by teachers and some parents around the country. We're looking forward to sharing those results with you. In the meantime, we want to ask a real teacher on our show about the types of activities that take place before a new kind of website is adopted, or a new app is brought into the classroom, or perhaps a new tool is introduced in the everyday activities that take place in the classroom. Because teachers are often mandated to use board-approved EdTech, but does it pass muster, and who is accountable for privacy failures, or who gets credit for the successes of EdTech in the classroom? What are your views on this, Tim?
Well, I think it varies radically from board to board. I think in talking to you over the last little while, I'm particularly impressed how well our board has handled it. You've been telling me about places where students don't have personal passwords and things like that, and that's a standard practice where we are. So it feels like in some cases, some boards have rushed into adopting educational technology without really thinking through the privacy or even just the social ramifications of what they're doing. But other boards have attempted to try and do due diligence. I think the really slippery part to this is the privacy issue in this sort of new realm of digital is challenging for everybody. So I think even with the best intents, there's still going to be struggles with it. But in some cases, it seems like there has been no forethought given to it at all.
Well, and that's a key thing, because when we say due diligence, we know that we should be doing a number of things. We should be reading privacy policies, interviewing vendors, looking at how these apps have been doing in other jurisdictions and how they've been adopted, and what some parents and some kids have said about it. But it's always surprising that school boards are unlikely. In fact, they're being quite secretive about the processes, the standardized processes that they have in place or should have in place in adopting EdTech. What do you know about the processes that take place behind the scenes before they land on a teacher's desk? Are these tools researched by the school board, or is it within the purview or the authority of teachers to introduce some of these technologies in the classroom?
Well, in Ontario, we have something called OSSPAC, which is a provincially run program that helps us get educational technology. And part of what OSSPAC does is that diligence, so that we can make sure the software is appropriate for school use. I think what's happened though over time is when we were, OSSPAC used to just deliver software to us. So we would have a local server that would have software we would use. We'd install it into the image on the school computers. And then generally that's where everybody would live, right? In the intranet of the school network using OSSPAC software. And as a general rule, it was a pretty safe environment. It was a real walled garden. But what's happened, along with business and everybody else, we've gone to the cloud, and that whole process is really under a lot of stress. When I've been working with our board in the imaging committee for a long time now, I think a decade, and in that time, our job at the imaging committee initially was to sort through this giant list of software and teacher requests, and then try and deliver to as many teachers as possible the software they were asking for. And OSSPAC would help us do that. But what's happened is since cloud-based computing and everybody existing online all the time now, things have shot off in all sorts of directions, and that oversight isn't centralized anymore. I I imagine the problems that are going on in classrooms are very similar to the same headaches that people are facing in business and they're facing in government, other government services. The the idea of us existing in the cloud offers all sorts of benefits, but they're the initial push to me always feels like it's a money saving thing. We don't need to buy Microsoft Office and install it on a bunch of computers if we can use Google Documents or something like that. Um, but the diligence around making sure that things are protected and secure isn't happening consistently. And I think not just in education, but I think in a lot of places. And people just don't recognize maybe the dangers of what they're doing when their data is streaming online, and a lot of it is uh, quite personal data.
Do you think that there's a bit of a delta between the level of understanding and the assumptions of parents when their kids are presented with this type of technology? Do you think parents are totally assuming that due diligence was properly done before that technology was deployed in the classroom? And do you think that delta is different? Or I should say, do you think there is a difference between the expectations of parents and the fact that teachers know that due diligence perhaps is not as rigorous as it should have been?
I think everybody would like to believe that the diligence is happening. As a parent myself, I would certainly hope that at no point is the education system taking in free software in order to sell my child's information. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any parent in Ontario who would say that that's okay. But on the other hand, a lot of them, parents and government and everybody else, want to find efficiencies in the system and cut costs. And I was thinking the other day as we were leading up to this, when was the last time I saw an educational technology get implemented because it's actually better for learning as opposed to just cheaper? And I'm having trouble thinking of a time.
So price-based decisions are not in the interests of children. Is that what you're saying?
I think that you've got to recognize the whole cost of something. So if you're going to say, hey, if we just go to the cloud and we do this and we suddenly don't have to buy this software and we can buy Chromebooks and other cheaper technology for the classroom instead of a full desktop and things like that, people, when they crunch numbers, uh, they're very, very selective with how they see the value in something. I always think of Mark Twain and, there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. And I think in accounting, as much as anywhere, that happens. If somebody thinks that, hey, this is going to make us look like we balance our books, and it means that we're leaking data onto the internet everywhere, but that's really hard to prove or show or anything else, then I think people just do it and then say, "Hey, we're being financially, sensible in that process."
Would you say that may be what even hastened the demise of on-prem software? Because when you have cloud-based systems that come with privacy issues but are cheaper, and even if the buyers, the clients, know that this is the case, would they in fact say, "Hey, it's easier for us to make a case based on price rather than for some ideal of privacy that is theoretical and it may be ethically sound, but it's hard to put our finger on and it's really hard to defend." Do we in fact, because this situation that we're in right now, last year and the past 2 years in fact have denoted an inflection point in in the way that technology has entered schools and classrooms, right? There's no way we're going to go back to installing our own technology and paying, I don't know, maybe 50 times as much as today's EdTech is costing school boards. So with that change came the acceptance of a certain amount of risk. And my concern is that certain amount of risk has not been fully understood. Is that right?
I think that's absolutely true, and that's well beyond education. I think that's a societal thing. I think when you look at democratic elections recently and the way they've been influenced online, when you look at this is a worldwide issue, well beyond the classroom. But the classroom should be one of those places where there's a higher standard of care and a higher standard of attention to this, because these are minors, they're children. So we shouldn't be thinking, hey, this is way cheaper than buying the software because we get it for free online, and then put kids into a situation where their data is being shared. And like I said, some boards seem to have made a real effort to do this, and then others haven't. And whatever is holding everyone to account seems to have a very light hand on this.
That I saw a story recently that said that Amazon's Alexa, these intelligent devices that we could use to order diapers without actually touching a keyboard. I'm sure they have other uses, but I'm just being facetious. But these things are being adopted by not just a few, but hundreds or perhaps thousands of classrooms in the United States. Did you hear about any such adoption in Canada? Are there any intelligent tools like that being used in the classroom?
I've never seen one in a classroom, and I've been to my fair share. Oddly, I did see one at the board office. We went in for training, and there was one in one of the new computer labs. And, they were doing the usual parlor tricks where they were like, Google play cool jazz and things like this, and it would. Um, but my favorite meme I saw recently was somebody saying, hey, Google, and the Google responds saying, the microphone is muted. I can't hear you until you unmute the microphone. Except you just said, yeah, what?
That's a good one.
Yeah, and
Um,
evidently that keeps happening. So I cannot believe that somebody would bring that into a classroom, but I'm sure it's happening. And again, the argument is it's that slippery thing, right? You're like, well, think of the efficiency, think of the benefits to students who have trouble with using keyboards or writing, or it opens access. So you could make, I think, quite a valid special education argument for using a tool like that. If you have a student who has a stutter, maybe it could help them with that. Like there are ways you could use this technology in an educational focus, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is we adopt another tool that's really designed for marketing and attention economy, and now it's suddenly finding its way into classrooms.
That's fascinating. I really appreciate your insights because you're talking to us from inside the school, and this is, as a parent, we don't have that kind of access to our teachers. Our teachers don't necessarily talk to us about their degree of understanding of what constitutes a privacy invasive app, or whether they're concerned about the tools that they are using, or the creative platforms that they've discovered online and they wanted to share with their students. So I guess my next question is, you're a tech savvy guy, and you have been for a long time, and you do such wonderful things with Cyber Titan, and I hope you can tell us a little bit more about your activities with the team that you lead and the ICTC in general.
Well, ICTC, I'd been working sort of using them as a resource for ICT jobs for my students. And when I saw them starting Cyber Titan, we got into it in the first year. And ever since then, it's just been growing year on year. One of the funny things about it is that while our teams have grown 500%, which is fantastic, and those students end up being really, really technically conscious of how disastrously unsecure operating systems are and things like that, because they're the ones who end up fixing them. They have a technician's understanding of the problem. The noise we make doing that competition and doing interviews and everything else really raises awareness in the general public. Since we started doing that, I get a lot more emails from teachers with, I just got this email. Is this phishing? And and usually my kids and I can then go after that email, look up where they're phishing from, contact the web provider, and shut the whole thing down. And I know that's a game of whack-a-mole, but for me, it's a learning opportunity for my students, and it does raise awareness in the building. So for me, part of cyber titan is the technical thrill of it, but the best thing I think maybe about it is the amount of noise it makes and the way it reverberates through the system. It really creates awareness.
That's really fantastic. How can other teachers partake in that type of initiative? How can they get in on it? Do you think other teachers should be asking about whether this would benefit their students?
Well, again, for what it costs, which is almost nothing, and I mean, really, the cost is just to run it. It's a nonprofit thing. But the amount of material you get back and the support you get means that you don't need to have a great deal of technical skill to get into it. Once you're in it, you very quickly pick up what's going on. It's one of those things where people can kind of imagine what the job of a police officer is, but when you get into a cybersecurity situation where you're actually doing it, and you start to think through all the ramifications of what's going on, it's a very powerful experience, and you immediately begin to appreciate the work that a police officer would do if you were in that position. So when you're doing the cybersecurity contest, you start to recognize maybe what IT is doing in the background at the school board to keep things sane. You realize how much noise there is there on the internet, how much ill will there is politically and through cybercrime. It's the internet really is the Wild West.
So, and I agree with you entirely. I think once you become attuned to the signal to noise ratio, you can't really go back. So it's not just about the students; it's also about the teachers becoming more savvy. Do you find that you are uncommonly tech savvy as compared to your peers? And do you think teachers should make more of an effort to be more tech literate?
I went to Nipissing for my teacher's college, and when I got out of there in 2003, we had a 1 day seminar at the end, which was very forward thinking because most people weren't doing this about educational technology. And in that case, they were really focused on how you can use it to assist students with special needs. But I think, especially the way things have gone now, where everybody lives in the cloud all the time. You walk down any school hallway, and the teachers and the students have their phones out. Everyone's connected to ICT infrastructure all the time, and to be intentionally oblivious to how that works, I don't think that's helpful for anyone, least of all a teacher who is trying to help students acclimatize themselves to this time we live in. And I get that it's difficult for everybody, but if we're going to use the technology all the time, then I think it's incumbent on teachers to get more technically savvy. I think you cannot roll out technology and use it in teaching and learning and be intentionally oblivious to how it works.
Do you think that certain schools get into this situation where there's one guy or maybe a couple of people who end up being the tech support for the rest of the staff, and they're just known as the nerds, and that kind of marginalizes them, and that may be why other teachers don't partake in investing in their own awareness, or what do you think is keeping teachers from having or acting on that curiosity to perhaps improve their skills?
I again, it's just my experience, but in the time I've been teaching, which is going on 2 decades now, um, initially it was very much that you're the nerd who can help us thing. But what's happened is the technology has become so present and it's so everywhere now that I think the value placed in my skills has risen because the school acknowledges my presence a lot more, which is lovely. Because it is an awful lot of work, and usually with no credit given. So that's appreciated. Just the awareness that your skill set is valuable, because that wasn't always the case. But I think, especially with the younger teachers coming in that I see, they're making an intentional effort to engage in this and become savvy. A good example would be I talked to one of our newer geography teachers about GIS, which is Geography Information Systems, and she was so excited about it that she's actually become our Skills Ontario GIS coach now, which is great because now we have a geography teacher with the geography skill set to do that. I was going to end up running it myself simply because it's to do with IT, but we needed somebody who also has that geography background and the theory and the knowledge to apply to the technology. And that has worked its way into everything. I was talking to our business head yesterday, and I said, I mean, next to my program, business is by far the most technically intensive program we have in the school. We have 3 labs in our business department, and they only have 4 classrooms. So business recognizes the importance of an implicit ICT awareness. We just need to maybe work it into the more academic ivory tower disciplines that think that it doesn't apply to them.
Do you take a certain a role within the school, and do you go out of your way to perhaps encourage other members of staff or other educators to improve? Do you think people in other schools who can get technology and who enjoy it should be encouraging others, or perhaps even, I don't know, holding some sort of seminars for other teachers, somehow encouraging them? What do you think is a way to make technology less or more approachable, um, in an effort to fall behind at a slower pace, I want to say, because you see the place where I feel that we are in EdTech right now is again just a transitional space. This is going to keep going. There's only going to be more of this. So we're assuming we're falling behind at some rate. So it's important to decrease the rate at which we're falling behind. So the sooner people jump on the bandwagon, the better. What do you think should be the initiatives that perhaps even school boards should support to get more teachers to be more savvy, and not just computer savvy, but also privacy and security savvy?
There are some people on my board who are a lot better at that kind of system wide thinking and system enhancement than I am. It took me a long time to realize this, but one of the things I'm good at is jumping in the deep end and then figuring out how to swim. And one of the things I'm not good at is patience with people who just refuse to acknowledge when something is becoming ubiquitous, like the technology. So we have people in the system. I'm thinking you should get maybe Jen Apgar from our board on here. Jen would be a fantastic example of somebody who can raise the temperature of the entire system around awareness with technology. Um, in my case, I think what I can do, and again, this is just from my point of view, but I can show people what's possible, and I can help with the technical hiccups. And I try and do that in as positive and encouraging a way as I can. But ultimately, you're never gonna convince the people who just refuse to budge to do it, and I just don't have the patience to do that. My wife Elena has a really good video where they talk about where you are on the train as far as leadership goes, and if you're an early adopter up at the front, or whether you're one of the middle people or one of the people at the back of the train who just will not budge no matter what. And that metaphor describes it, saying you shouldn't spend a lot of time on the people at the back of the train because you're going to burn yourself out not moving anything. So what you need to do is find those people in the middle car who are maybe willing to adapt, connect them with the early adopters, and try and raise the temperature that way. Eventually, you'll get some of the people at the back to move forward, but you can't force them. And the irony is, these are people who are sitting there with a Chromebook cart they've just called out. All of their kids are on the Chromebooks, and they have very little understanding of what's going on. And usually, I end up fixing those Chromebooks, um, which is frustrating. If you're going to use the technology, you need to have a basic awareness of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, from a privacy and security perspective, do you think that there's any responsibility on the part of the parents to perhaps ask more questions about EdTech in the classroom or some new tool, or even, as you said, passwords? Hey, you know what? My kid came home today and he was given this password, or she was given these new credentials where she's expected to be typing in her essays. And is there any onus on the parents to ask who's this data shared with and how long will this persist? Is it for the entirety of the kid's academic life? Who inspects this data? How are the systems connected? Is there any responsibility, or should parents have to ask these questions when in fact that's the kind of thing that school boards should be doing? I don't know. What do you think?
I think as a parent, if you're going to drop $1,000 on a phone and then send the kid to school with it, I think you're implicit in the situation now. Ironically, one of the biggest issues I have with kids on phones in class is because their parents are contacting them during class. As a parent, I would find that really inappropriate, but apparently a lot of other parents don't. The helicopter is a real thing, you know? But and it's a frustrating thing. I think if you sat parents down and just stopped them for a minute, and that means getting them off their phone too, they would probably have an intelligent, rational response to this. But that's usually not what you get. You're usually interrupting somebody else in their day. They tend to refer to ICT and all of this digital technology as that stuff. So the minute somebody calls it that stuff, I know where their stance is on this. They don't feel any personal responsibility for it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
parent or not. And yeah, I find that quite frustrating.
Do you think there's a risk to students with all of this technology in the classroom?
I think there's a risk to Canadian democracy. I think there's a risk to the parents themselves. I think there's a risk to the kids. A running joke we have in class is the last generation to ever have a successful political career graduated about 5 years ago, because everybody else is just hanging in the wind on the internet, and who knows who's recording what they've got. And you know how hard it is to get rid of data. So it's probably going to be available for someone to find forever.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we created the survey that you very kindly helped us with, and you certainly reviewed and helped fine tune some of those questions for our survey, which is, again, to remind our listeners, it's at survey.edtechprivacy.ca. And we want as many teachers and as many parents as possible to take it. Take it anonymously if you want. In fact, I don't think we're collecting names at all. And we're not looking at logs. We're not storing logs. So the idea here is we just want to know what the diversity of tools that are being used across Canada in classroom, what that is, what that looks like, where it's going, what's more innovative, whether people are even bothering to read privacy policies. Obviously, we know the answer to that question. But I really appreciate your coming on the show today. Thank you very much for your views and your insights, as always. Tremendous. We appreciate your candid views on things, and I want to thank our producer in the background, Stephen Hurley of VoiceEd Radio. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you very much, Tim King. We'll have you on again very soon, I'm sure. And I'll say goodbye to our listeners now and see you on the next episode.